Hello, everyone, and welcome to the third episode of The Voice of Liberty. In this one, we will be taking a look into an important aspect of life itself economics. I think it's essential to cover this topic since economics is the science that moves the world. Well, that would be actually be physics, but you all get me. So, we all know that a recession is coming. That is, if it's not already here, of course, because with all of the coronavirus, the markets are not behaving properly anyway. I feel it could be good to take a look into this in order to explain it. So, we will talk about the Austrian School of Economics, which is one of the most relevant ones when it comes to free markets and free trade. The Austrian school began in the 5th century when St. Thomas Aquinas, in the University of Salamanca, in Spain, tried to explain human action and social organization. And then there came many more economists like Karl Menger, Mises, Hayek, that gave the Austrian school more of a shape. The main difference between the other economic schools and the Austrian one is the way they try to explain things. While most of them use data and mathematical models, the Austrian school works with logic and using some basic axioms that we all know are true. These axioms, or principles, are given by yet another science, or pseudoscience, that is praxeology. Praxeology is the study of human action, and some of its principles are the following. The human being always acts. We prefer some things to others. We resort to action to achieve our ends. Time influences our actions. The incentive that pushes a person to act is a discomfort about something. Therefore, if a person is perfectly happy, it won't act. So, every person that acts is unhappy. All these axioms we can find in the book Human Action by Ludwig von Mises, and they are the base of the reasoning for the Austrian school. We reject the use of mathematics and economics because it is impossible to predict markets full of millions of people since everything is variable. Let's take a look at some of its theories and how they contrast with the current economic thought of politicians and bureaucrats. Please keep in mind there is a lot more to these topics than what I'm about to say, but we will detail all of them in further episodes. Let's start with price determination. Currently, the classic school of economics says that prices are given by the cost of production, and the neoclassical school believes that prices are determined by the equilibrium between supply and demand. Our Austrian school disagrees with both of these schools. It says that prices come from subjective factors like an individual's preference to buy or not to buy a particular good. It holds that costs of production are also determined by preferences based on the value of the other productive alternatives. This means that costs of production depend on a lot of factors, and you cannot really determine what they will be. And of course, demand and supply are also subjective because of the individual's choices and preferences. That's why most maximum and minimum prices set by politicians end up in disaster. So that was the basics of price determination. Let's now talk about capital goods. Capital goods are one of the factors of production among human labor and natural resources. Although Rothbard states that capital goods are only a mix between labor and natural elements, so they are not really a different factor. Anyway, capital goods are products humans make to help themselves create consumer goods more easily and efficiently. For example, in the construction business, hammers, nails, and machinery are part of their capital good, where their final product or consumer good is, for example, a house. So the Austrian school, and this is where it gets interesting, says that capital goods are all different and heterogeneous, and you cannot substitute one for another, meaning a hammer is a hammer, and it's totally different from a screwdriver. This may seem obvious, but in the Keynesian models, which are the ones that politicians try to impose on society, this is all ignored. In their microeconomic and macroeconomic formulas, producing $10,000 in hammers is the same as producing $10,000 in screwdrivers. The Austrian school argues that creating the wrong capital goods leads to a waste of resources, and this waste of resources requires painful readjustments, which we call crises or recessions. So I hope everything is clear up until this point. Now let's get into interest rates. Interest rates are the cost of borrowing money. It is often expressed in a percentage quantity of the borrowed money. So for example, if the interest rate is 25% and someone lends me $100, that means that I will have to give them back $100 plus the cost of borrowing that money, which is $25. The classical theory of interest rates is that they are subject to the supply and demand of capital. This may seem true, but it does not fully explain why they change. The Austrian school says that they are determined by the will of the individuals to consume their money now or in the future. So basically, saving it or wasting it. For example, if the interest rate lowers, it suggests that people are putting money away and not wasting it, so there will be more capital to borrow in the future. So let's now talk about the effect of inflation. Inflation is a term used to measure the increment of monetary supply. So for example, if there are $100 in circulation and the inflation is 5%, this means next year there won't be just $100. There will be $100 and $5 because of the 5% in inflation. So the Austrian school believes that an increase in the monetary supply, not supported by an increase in the production of capital goods, that leads to higher prices. And this is obvious if we think about it. If there are $100 in circulation, in an economy which, for example, a bottle of milk costs $50, and then we increase the monetary supply from $100 to $200 in circulation, then the very same bottle of milk, it won't cost just $50, it will cost $100 because we doubled the monetary supply. The problem here is that prices do not increase at the same rate. If this were the case, the only problem with inflation would be the depreciation of the currency. The reality is much different. Because the new money created by the government is given to some people first, which will be the ones that benefit from it, most people will have to pay more for the same goods until prices adjust accordingly. So for example, Peter the plumber realizes he's earning the same dollars for his work while he has to pay Paul the baker more for the same loaf of bread. So Paul the baker becomes rich at the expense of Peter the plumber. This happens because the government injected the money by purchasing bread. So the prices of bread increase drastically, leaving behind a trail of price distortion. And we come to the final theory and one of the most relevant. And this is the business cycle theory, which explains why there are so many crises and recessions in our society. The Austrian school holds that these cycles are created because of the government's attempt to control money. A government controls money through the interest rates, that we already know what that is, at which central banks lend money to commercial banks. This artificial change in the interest rates leads to misallocation of capital, which needs to be reallocated correctly through an economic recession. So why does a recession need to happen? The labor and resources invested in non-profitable industries, like construction and remodeling during the financial crisis of 2008, has to be reallocated in industries which are actually economically profitable. The short term of this reallocation causes higher unemployment and a drop in investments. Governments and central banks will try to avoid a healthy and natural recession by lowering even more the interest rates. But this will only lead to even more malinvestments, and it will make much worse the recession when it happens, because it cannot be avoided. So that was about it. Feel free to message me with your questions or just if you want to debate about something I said here. I hope everything was more or less clear, and thanks a lot for listening once again. We'll talk in the next episode, and stay free.